Our next panel is Meeting the Present Moment on translators navigating cultural taboos, censorships, and establishing solidarity. With the rising number of book bans, political scrutiny of education and libraries, and refugees and migrants in limbo across the United States, how do translators navigate linguistic and ideological borders? What does it mean to translate literature in a time of growing censorship and cultural polarization? How can translators respond to book challenges, publisher hesitations, and various aspects of censorship, including self-censorship? Writer and award-winning translator Anton Hur, writer and Persian translator Parisa Saranj, and writer and translator between Chinese, French, Spanish, and English, Jenna Tang, will discuss what it means in concrete terms to establish or contribute to one's community through translation and how to deal with recurring issues such as exploitation and burnout. Please welcome Anton, Parisa, and Jenna. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Okay. Say something so that we can.
Hello.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. I think my notes say that we are going to introduce ourselves first. So why don't we do it in the order that we're going to present? So Parisa, would you like to go introduce yourself first?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Parisa. I translate from Persian into English. Very, very rarely the other way around. When you're not really accomplished, it's easy. You don't have much to introduce. So that's it, Jenna. It's all you.
You are accomplished. What are you talking about?
So go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jenna Tang. I work as a board of director. I'm one of the board member at Alta, and I translate from Chinese, Mandarin Chinese, Hakka dialect, Spanish, a little bit of French into English. And I've been based in Taiwan for a few years now, but I used to be based in New York. And it's great to be coming back to New York, seeing everyone's face, and to be speaking with two very talented translators. And I'll pass it on to Anton.
Oh, wasn't there a book or something you translated?
Oh, I have a book. I am in complete oblivion about it after a very long fall book tour for this book. It's called Fang Ziqi's Birds of Paradise by Taiwanese feminist author Lin Yinhan. And I've done about 20 university tour with this book in particular, because this book was once censored, not by the government, but by the cultural taboos in Taiwan. And I believe narratives like this are somehow semi-censored in a lot of different places around the world. So that's why I find it really important to bring this book on an extensive tour on my own, even though it took an emotional toll on me. But I still find the work itself very meaningful to myself, and I do appreciate the fact that I'm able to be in a position to advocate for the author, even though she's no longer here. And I will stop my rambling and pass it on to Anton.
Yes, hi, I am Anton Hur. Editor Alexa Frank at Harper Via once called me the Sailor Moon of literary translation. And right now, I'm kind of like known for judging prizes. And someone mentioned to me that they pointed out that I did all of these things like almost back to back, where I was a judge for the Dublin Literary Award, and then I released my debut novel, also from Harper Via, and then I was a judge on the International Booker Prize jury. And then they said, wow, Anton, you're very generous. And I thought, my reaction was, wow, that was not a healthy thing to do back to back. But I think that, and going into the next thing, but I have this belief that translators can be, you don't have to be, but translators can be very, very active and can sort of act from a place of agency. Because I think there is this prejudice about translators where like we're expected to be very passive and neutral, yeah. Something that I would like to point out about the three of us is that we all translate from our first languages into our second language, which is English. And this, of course, comes with a lot of very interesting dynamics in Anglophone publishing that we will happily go into at some point in our discussion. So my notes say we're very nervous right now because we saw the first panel and they were so prepared and eloquent. And also, Khaled used all of my material. So we're kind of nervous that, are we underprepared?
And here I am. I'm like, I'm on a panel with these 2 stars. I'm just gonna hide behind them.
Is it convincing that it's all in here?
Yeah, we're kind of like in a fugue state right now. But we do have notes, and my notes say that we have to talk about how and why we came up with the theme of this panel. And I'll talk about this first because I came up with this panel again because I have this fundamental belief that translators lead the discourse instead of following it, or we can lead the discourse instead of following it. I think like the number one question for a long time people would ask me is like, how do you choose the books that you translate? And I really like this question because I actually do choose the books that I translate. People often give me the job, and that's becoming more and more common now. But especially in the beginning of my career, I had to create my own job, and I had to choose what books that I wanted to see published, like in the Anglosphere. And I had a very sort of, people would call it like an activist mindset, where I saw the kinds of books that, for example, the Literary Translation Institute of Korea would keep trying to push into the Anglosphere and into translated literature. And it would all be the same authors over and over again. They were all, the sort of like older, cisgender, very, very academically inclined, politically connected authors. And to me, that's not what Korean literature was like to me. To me, Korean literature was edgy, and there was a lot of genre mixing and genre adjacent work. There were a lot of women writers, and there were queer writers. I remember when I first started putting Love in the Big City by Sang-Young Park, which is a queer novel, out into the world, people would be like, I didn't know that queer literature existed in Korea. I didn't know that queer people existed in Korea, like the kind of things that people would say to my face. And that just like solidified my resolve in that, you know what? Because in interviews I would joke, and this was a joke. People would be like, what do you aim to do with in your work as a translator? And I'd say like, I want to change the face of Korean literature in translation. And people would take that so seriously, and that was very amusing for me. But then at one point, I realized I was changing the face of Korean literature in translation. And that sort of made me realize the power of what translators can do. Because I think traditionally translators are always seen as these like shadowy, passive figures who are basically, translation robots. And the reason why AI translation is so like in the discourse right now is because people can be automated and it really can't. But we can get into that a bit later. So the previous panel kept mentioning the Mythical English Reader essay that I once wrote. This is available in an anthology called Violent Phenomena, which edited by Jeremy Tang and Dr. Kavita Banot. And this is a really, really great book. And in this book, like my essay is just one of the essays in this book with many, many wonderful authors. And it's the silly essay that I wrote that people keep quoting from, which I don't understand. But like I'd be at a conference and people would come up to me and be like, I teach your essay, Mythical English Reader, in class. And I'd be like, why? So what it's about like generally what it's about is it's about this idea that we are translators are translating for this like mythical English reader, and then I started thinking about who that was, and he's a white man, he's finicky, and I had all of these words to describe him. In the original draft of this essay, I picture myself typing away at my computer at my office, and then the mythical English reader kind of like looking down at my work and like criticizing it. And then what I do is I get up from my desk, I strangle him to death, and then I bludgeon him with a book until he shuts up. And then Jeremy was like, sweetheart, I'm not sure if this angle is gonna work for this book. Can we kind of maybe? So the version that you see, I don't like. It's less provocative than the original, but people do keep like talking to me about it. And what that kind of makes me think is that, wow, people are kind of shook by this idea that we should be thinking about who we translate for, and everyone has a different answer as to who we translate for. People think that I have certain ideas about like what I have a very specific answer for who we should be translating for. And in the essay, I do say, well, I translate for myself, which is a very easy, sort of shallow kind of answer. But unfortunately, I'm an easy, shallow kind of person. But everyone will have a different answer. And what I always tell people is that you have to think about who you're translating for. Whatever answer you come up with is the answer you come up with, but the important thing is that you think about it. Because a lot of translators are very mindless. They don't think about it. They are passive, and they do kind of give up their agency a lot. And that kind of attitude is what I object to. Not so much as like you're translating for white people or you're translating for cisgender people, like, I don't know, like it's your life and I don't know your life. But there are people who just don't think about it and default to what they're told to think about. And that's why I wanted to sort of have our panel in which we think about the different ways that we express our agency as translators. Wow, that was a lot of words that I spoke. Okay, so Parisa, so what does meeting the moment with translation mean for you?
I went to journalism school because of the principle of becoming the voice for the voiceless. And when you're Iranian, and when you were born and raised in Iran, becoming an activist or a fighter, it's a given. It comes from the moment you're born, because the country has been struggling for freedom and democracy since the beginning of time, basically. So you don't have any choice. You either become part of the system and the government, or you completely give up and completely become numb to everything and do not care about anything that's happening in the country. So really the only thing that is left is like, what can I do for the cause? So I remember when I was a kid growing up in Iran, I was just horrified when it came to doing actual frontline activism. Every time there was a protest, I would be just like, I'm such a chicken. Like, I cannot go out and I cannot protest and I cannot shout. Because I was this scrawny kid and I was sickly, and they really beat you to an inch of your life, so they really don't care. And I always felt bad about that. I felt bad that I'm like such a chicken. So it really came down to I have the pen, and that's why I'm going to become a writer, and then later when I was 18 years old, I came to America. I discovered that there is a world called translation, and I can be a translator. So all of that to say, meeting this present moment, and you do not need me to tell you how horrifying the present moment is. And for a lot of you, you're living it for the first time. As an Iranian, I am reliving it. Literally, like everything that is being said and being done, I can give you examples of like time and the person and the laws and the events that I witnessed in my own life growing up in Iran. So to say that I am doing what I'm doing to be the voice for the voiceless, it really comes down to that. And because the darkness is so big and it's so overwhelming and it feels so powerful, I often ask myself, okay, what can I do? I cannot fight the whole system. I cannot stand up to the whole system. I cannot protest. I'm still the same chicken person. So on a very small micro level, right? I often ask myself, what can I do to make a change in like at least one person's life? And I've been so lucky in my short-lived young career as a translator that I have not had the privilege of choosing what I want to translate, but the projects that have come to me have been just dream projects. Well, first of all, it's because Persian is not really a very popular language. It's only spoken in Iran and in Afghanistan by the Hazaras, which are a minority. And then there is this poor country called Tajikistan that I don't think anyone even knows that they speak Persian, but they have a different alphabet. So that said, for example, I worked on 2 documentaries. That one of them was a documentary about the effects of censorship, the systematic censorship that's done by the government and what it does to people on an individual level. Another one was a documentary about the life of a human rights activist and lawyer, and then later on I went on to translate her little book that was kind of like her take on the women's rights movement in Iran and all of that. So those are like all part of how I'm meeting the present moment. And then, but as I said, they don't come along often. So on a very, very small level, for me, comes down to who can I help with my language skills? So I've been volunteering to help with Afghan refugees who need their stories translated for their courts. And so things like that. I guess ranting is a thing that happens when you're so nervous. So yeah, so to say all of that is that for me, it's about what can I do no matter the size, either small or big. How can I do to help? What about you, Jenna?
I think for me, it has large part, for me to engage with the world and world literature and how I use my language to connect with other languages is important to me. And at the same time, the bigger question for me is what else matters? Or what already matters and has already been talked about, but hasn't been talked about enough. And what can I bring from my cultural perspective to be in conversation with other cultures around similar topics? And that connection is what I'm seeking in the present moment. When I brought Fang Ziqi's Versa Paradise into publication, the process itself is The author originally doesn't, the estate, because the author has already passed away, so the estate involves the parents and her very close ones, and they originally didn't want to be translated. And it took me a very long time to, at the beginning, tell them that I am very interested in bringing the topics to the English-speaking sphere, and it takes me a lot of time just to tell them what I'm actually doing and giving them bits and bits of I'm bringing this to a reading, I'm bringing this to a conference, I'm bringing this to be in conversation with other feminist translators and authors. And just little by little, it originally almost felt like a self-censorship because of the invasion of privacy at the beginning when this book was first released in Taiwan, and a lot of journalists just invaded into the author's funeral and invaded into the parents' privacy and so on and so forth. So they guarded up themselves. And it somehow became cultural taboos because it's talking about sexual violence, and it became self-censorship because they want to protect themselves. And little by little, finally, as I worked on, and eventually this project was brought to the Alta mentorship that I was doing in 2021. And eventually, when I was having these layers of communications with them, that first I talked to the agents, and then the agent would talk to the publishers, and the publishers would talk to the parents, and then the spouse separately in order to get back to me. So layers of communications that made the process long and difficult. But eventually, as I was working on translating the whole book, which I don't recommend emerging translators to do, to translate the whole book on spec, don't do that. But that's what I did. And eventually, the author's estate, especially the parents, asked me, where's the book? And that's when I really felt like I was in a position to finally be able to pitch it and to offer samples and to build this relationship, even though the author is no longer here, but to be able to break that censorship, that these things are something people shy away from, either because of cultural taboos, because people don't know how to talk about it. But I really enjoyed that moment of breaking through and know that I'm finally able to break that. And I'm finally able to bring this discourse in a whole different perspective besides in the past, like the invasion of privacy, and that these things could be autobiographical, but how much does it matter if it's autobiographical or not? And why do works about sexual violence, or about feminist translations, or about anything that's vulnerable or seems personal, has to be judged whether it's autobiographical or not? Why can't we just write a story about it while being aware of all the cultural and different levels of sensitivity? So that was my experience, and it further down the way as a translator, it keeps reminding me just what else matters, what else is underrepresented, and what should we talk about more. I'll get to that later, but it brings me back to translating my own dialect, which doesn't exist in any sort of written system, although it is trying to be brought into written system nowadays. It's a Hakka dialect that's only passed down by oral speaking. It's a language that I spoke until I was 12 years old. And eventually I moved on to middle school, high school, and there are more Hokkien speakers. Hokkien is another dialect in Taiwan that's more common, more widespread, while Hakka is just spoken in 3 different counties in a small island in Taiwan. So I'll get to that later, but overall, it brings me from bring discourse about gender topics, sexual violence, all the way back to the homecoming of my own dialect.
Before you started the project of translating the book, were you like planning to I'm going to become this translator who has to do all this work and do all this work to get the trust of the family, or were you planning to be really this warrior to stand up for this story, or did halfway through you felt like you have to become? Did you ever at any point wanted to give up?
I did, and I talked to Anton about it, and I talked to so many other translators, Jeremy and so many other people about it, because it was such a difficult process that even though I pitched it to different places, but a lot of places, not because they're trying to censor it, but just because it's a very sensitive topic that is really hard to address to. And people receive the information and receive the topics in very different levels. So it adds to the complexity. And at the same time, there's always the thing I feared the most when I launched this book were questions from Taiwanese press. Because once again, I'm in similar position as the author, kind of being put under a spotlight and being asked, why are you bringing this? Are you also a survivor? And there are all kinds of privacy-related questions that aren't always relevant to the kind of work that I'm presenting and doing. So that's the main challenge. But at the same time, what I'm most aware of is to think about what are the censorships around topics like this, and how does it vary and differ in different countries, different cultures, even different languages. And I want to know more about that. And I think what's valuable about being in translators community is that we're able to be in a space where this kind of conversation is possible. And Anton, so, well,
What about you?
so what about you?
How do you?
Do you love our natural transitions? Anyway, yeah, what Jenna said and what Parisa said, translation as a form of advocacy. It's like we're very natural advocates, I think. Even when we're even at the most passive, translation is a form of advocacy. You are literally giving voice to people who otherwise would not have that voice. You're literally kind of giving someone a platform. So how I deal with this idea, like how do I meet the present moment as a translator? So a fun thing happened last year in Korea. So I live in Korea. That's why I'm a bit rambly right now, because I'm jet lagged and I arrived yesterday. I live in Korea, and it was December, and my husband had gone to Osaka for a conference, and I was just minding my own business at home. And then a translator messaged me on Instagram. It's like, oh my God, Anton, are you okay? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And like, your president declared martial law. I'm like, what? I feel like I would know if that happened, because it was like 11 o'clock at the time, so it's been like, he declared it at 10:30 p.m., I believe, on a Friday night. And I was like, I feel like I would know in the air if that happened, because I've translated so much Korean literature where, about dictators and so forth. And then I went on the internet and I was like, oh my God, like, what is this, the 1970s martial law? And my first instinct was to rush to Gwanghwamun Plaza or the National Assembly, which was the first instinct of many Koreans later on that we learned, and to protest. And in the Korea's Velvet Mafia, I know a National Assembly aide to one of the National Assembly members, and I kept thinking about him because on the news, because they were live broadcasting the vote that would bring down the martial law. By the way, Americans, you guys don't have an equivalent of that kind of safeguard, so good luck when that happens. So what the National Assembly can vote to strike down martial law. And the president is now alleged to have ordered martial law troops to the National Assembly to drag out the members to prevent them from voting. And to prevent that, the National Assembly aides were literally barricading the halls of the National Assembly, and they were ready to throw their bodies at the guns. And Lee Jae-myung, who is now our president, Lee Jae-myung, who was a National Assembly member at the time, was live broadcasting himself as he jumped the fence of the National Assembly because the troops would not allow him inside. As he jumped the fence of the National Assembly, he's like a 72-year-old man. And he was telling the Korean people, everyone watching this live broadcast, you have to come to the National Assembly now. Now is the time for you to protect your democracy. And it was a call to action. And I was like, okay, I have to go to the National Assembly. But I live in Incheon. And National Assembly in Seoul, it's 2 hours. And I know from experience, because Korea has had a major democratic nationwide protest once in every decade. And I've been in every single one of them since like the noughties. Before the noughties, I did not really live in Korea. And so I know that they'll do things like have the subways, trains not stop at those stations to just like run them through. Like historically, I know this, and I know this from experience. So it was also 11 p.m. and I'm like, martial law means that planes can't land, and my husband was supposed to come back from Japan the next day. And it's so funny about my husband because like he then emailed me. He was like, oh, you know what? I believe in Korean democracy. I'm going to go to sleep. And this will be, he's Thai American. He's not even Korean. It's like, I'm just going to go to sleep, and I will know what like, you know, everything will be fine in the morning. And I was like, wow, and so I was about to go, but then I realized the trains won't stop. I don't know if the trains will run long enough for me to get to Yeouido, where the National Assembly is. And so I thought, oh God, like what else can I do? Like I feel so powerless. And I realized I can live tweet it, which is a very strange place for your mind to go. And then as I was beginning to live tweet it, by the third tweet, I was like, oh, wait a minute, I hate Twitter now. And everyone hates Twitter now. I'm gonna move this to Blue Sky. So I made a Blue Sky link and I moved it to Blue Sky. And I live tweeted the entire process. Live Skype the entire process, where like the troops were moving into the National Assembly. My friends were like barricading the corridors, like thank you student activism experience that they all have. And then the vote happened, and then like I was just live broadcasting all of that like all night. I did not sleep that night. I don't think many Koreans slept that night. And like my follower count on Blue Sky went from like 2,000 to 13,000 like overnight, like as I was live skying this. To me, it was important that I'm a Korean citizen. I know I sound vaguely American, but I'm a Korean citizen who lives in Korea. There's nothing American about me. And I have just gone through so many years as a literary translator and as someone growing up overseas, what people think of Korea. Like people have this conception of Korea as like this poor country under several dictatorships. It was only like 3 or maybe 4, but like this that went under like several dictatorships and was always like this autocratic country. I'm like, no, we actually have a very long tradition of A, civil unrest since the Joseon, at least since the Joseon dynasty, and B, of like fighting for democracy. Like our democracy was not given to us, certainly not by you guys. We fought for our democracy. Like Korea constructed its democracy like with blood and sweat and tears. And so because I consider myself as coming from that tradition, I have, like all Koreans have like this mentality of we are not individuals, we are in a system, and every single part has to function properly in order for us to do the things that we need to do, like pull our country out of poverty and create democratic systems where none existed, et cetera. And so I thought about what I can do in that moment, and what I could do in that moment was, oh, I'm perfectly bilingual. So all these people on like overseas media who are talking about Korea like this democratic backwater, I'm going to explain to them every single thing that's happening and contextualize it historically that this is not our first rodeo. This is not our first pro-democracy rodeo. And explain to them, like, how did these barricades appear so quickly, like in the halls? Like, how did these nerds, these congressional aides who, went to like really nerdy schools, like, how do they know how to construct a strong barricade? It's because they were all student protesters when they were younger, when they were students. And so I contextualized all of that. I translated everything that was happening. This is also something similar to what I did during COVID. And I remember I kept warning, like Korea was the second country struck by COVID after China. And I remember just warning people over and over and over again, we lived through MERS, this is what you have to do. Koreans are masking up, you guys have to mask up. And I just remember feeling so betrayed by the community online while I was doing that, because like they were treating Koreans like we were just diseased, and oh, we're not, and they're like, oh, it's never gonna come to our country because we're a clean country, like we're a first world country, like we're not, and I'm like, no, it's gonna come for you. And indeed it did. And that was like one of those moments where I was like, oh wow, I know that as a literary translator, when I translate a book, there are so many people who would see like an Asian name on the cover and they'll be like, oh, I'm not gonna read that book. Like, I know that there are so many readers like that who will immediately discount a book for being written by like, you know, a non-man or a POC, et cetera. And then there's a Korean discount that existed, that still exists to a large extent, where if you, like, they pay less money for like translations and translators and Korean fiction and so forth. It's gotten a lot better now, but to a very large extent, like, especially in critical spaces, like, there is a kind of like discount of Korean literature. So I knew what the conception was, and I wanted to challenge that conception. And so I was like, so I wanted people to understand Korean history, our democratic history, and that's why I chose to meet that moment in that sense. There is this thing that Octavia Butler said. She who wrote, you know, Parable of the Sower, she like foresaw all of the things that are happening now, and someone asked her, so what's the solution? Like, what can we do? What can I do in order to, you know, safeguard our democratic institutions and whatnot? And she said, we kind of have like this idea in America that everyone is an individual and the individual is very powerful, but that's just not true, really. The solution does not come from one person. It does not come from one hero. The solution comes from a constellation of people. And it's the constellation that's the collective solution. What you are doing as an individual may seem very small, but if you take it in the aggregate, everyone has to do their part in order for the actual solution that will work to work. And I think for Koreans, this is ingrained from like a very young age, where like you don't throw litter on the ground, because like if one person starts doing it, then everyone starts doing it. And so like it's such a small thing to just like not litter. But it's understood that if we create a system where everyone like does their little part in order to not do it, then that's the solution for the kinds of problems that we have. But going back to what I said about how the West has projections about our different countries, because I feel like there is such a colonial legacy around the American project. How do you guys feel about like how you deal with that as translators?
I mean, as you were talking, I'm sitting here, I'm like, oh, I wish it was like this with Iran, because this narrative about Iran that has been being told since the 1979 revolution in America, it's so strong and it's so difficult to break. You know, like, oh, there was this country who was a paradise, and then overnight these turbaned mullahs came over, and now it's a living hell, right? And it's been so difficult to break that, and the voices that are talking about Iran are all those loud mouths that have connections with the Republicans and are very pro-war. They want war against Iran. Because they don't care how. They just want this government out. And to be able to raise your voice and just tell them, no, there is more, it's just so difficult. So for example, right now we are actually having the 3rd year anniversary of the death of Mahsa Amini, who was a young woman, was completely like covered up, she was fine. It just happened that the morality police in Tehran didn't like what she was wearing, and literally they just like beat her to death. That sparked this movement that later became known here in the West as women life freedom movement, and so many people were killed as young as 9, babies in their mother's arm, as they were just like literally just standing to the side and watching the crowds. So many people have disappeared. We don't really have a good number of how many people have been jailed or killed, because not everyone is brave enough to come out and say, you know, my child or my family died during the protest. So to be able to use, you know, my voice as a translator, I often feel like, oh, it's not like anybody reads my like articles on Ms. Magazine about the movement, and it feels like so. I just feel like this is like little voice from the bottom of the barrel that is trying to reach. So I'm just in awe of what you're doing. But to talk about, you know, this Western projection, I know for my example of Iran, it's tale as old as time. And I personally find it very difficult to, you know, for example, I'll give you an example. I'm trying to find a publisher for a novel that is, even though there is no mention of the country Iran, but once you start reading it, it's a given that a country like Iran has that systematic censorship machine that goes beyond publishing, and it goes beyond books, intellectuals, and like it really comes down to like individual level in your home and how you self-censor yourself. So so I get this novel and I'm like, yes, this is like so America right now, and what's gonna happen to America, and like I know that like all the publishers are gonna jump on it. And then, which is like the illusion like all authors have about their books. But so I'm showing it around, everyone reads it, everyone loves it, but it's too short. So I'm like sitting here, I'm like, back in Iran, we have to fight the censorship and the fact that the author could not publish this book in Iran. That's why she asked me to translate it, and she even translated it into French and published it in France because she couldn't publish it in Iran. So I have to deal with that censorship over there, and here I have to deal with this censorship of like the length or the money or like the financial censorship of it. Let's see. I hope it made sense. But my point was trying to say that it's very difficult. It's been happening since forever. For our countries. I mean, even on a personal level, I feel like I always come second to a white person with blue eyes and blonde hair who studied Persian here in America, or like studied Persian, versus like me as a native speaker. So like even at some point I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna start taking off Iranian American from my bio. Yeah, so that's really, it's a struggle, and I'm still fighting it. I mean, I'm here, the fact that we are here, the fact that we have places like CAT, that I always say like they treat translators like royalty, literally. You have no idea how much it means, especially for like, you know, someone who translates from Persian.
Sorry, we're kind of running out of time. Sorry to cut. Did you want to say something about translating from Hakka?
Yes. Speaking about Western projection, I feel like the biggest, almost like stereotype, even though part of it being the reality of living as Taiwanese, is that we're constantly being mentioned that there's a potential war that could break out between China and Taiwan, and which is partly true, and it can happen anytime. But as a Taiwanese living overseas, I oftentimes feel like that's the only thing that's brought up to me. And it's very cruel to be reminded that your country could be in war anytime, which we already know. So I don't need reminders that there might be wars coming over. And a lot of those perspectives, while I'm traveling overseas and people talking to me, letting me know that they know about Taiwan because of this, that is really cruel to me, because at the same time, there's so much more that I want people to know about Taiwan. Like, when I go back home, everything's peaceful. There are so many mountains, people are always hiking, and there are all kinds of activities, as if this thing never have existed. While in the overseas international perspective, this is the thing that a lot of people have been seeing. And so there's so much I want to bring to the international sphere, such as how in Taiwan we keep talking about like the conflicts between Taiwan and China, but at the same time, there are indigenous people, over 26 tribes of indigenous people whose land were occupied by Han Chinese. But all we talk about in terms of the identity, quote unquote, identity of Taiwan is the civil war between the different Han Chineses. And the indigenous literature is just completely erased in certain ways. And that, I think, is important to talk about. And so just to flatten the reality of Taiwan being the potential war is just more than cruel. And that also spawns me to think about how in Taiwan, there's also this different categorizations that when it comes to different communities, it's not necessarily as ethnical differences, but more about dialect differences, different communities, sometimes divided or sometimes congregated by different dialects, languages, and all. And that kind of diversity is something that is even that is worthy of discovering. And there's so much more than that, than just talking about, because there's a lot of Western reporters that wants to talk about a war in order to seek validation from us as Taiwanese, while that doesn't represent everything about Taiwan.
Okay, I think we have some time for questions. If you raise your hand, we can get a microphone to you, maybe in the back.
Hi, I know you mentioned blue sky earlier, and so I've also been wondering with social media and some of the progression with social media, and for me particularly TikTok, which I know definitely has its negative impacts, but I think is a way for myself as an American who didn't have access to certain countries and certain media in different countries, I now feel like I can see things that were hidden before. So I'm wondering if there, even if it's a small one, if there has been a shift with social media and like accessibility with social media, like TikTok and things like that.
Sure. I mean, like, I grew up in the 90s, and I watched, the Balkan massacres and Rwanda and all of that on CNN. And I remember I was living in Bangkok when East Timor happened, and I remember being enraged. I was like, this is on CNN. They're right next door. Why isn't anyone doing anything? And the same thing really is happening now. Like, someone said the genocide against the Palestinians is the first genocide to be live broadcast on social media. And they're always saying, and when you see the videos coming out of Palestine, they speak perfect English. They're very articulate. They tell you exactly what is going on. Video evidence, photo evidence, all of it. Like, what is it doing? I know it is raising consciousness, but to me it's very clear that awareness is extremely important. It is like, it's not as effective as people may be fooling them to think, and it may be lulling people into the sense of complacency, like, oh, well, people are talking about it, it's on social media, so there must be someone somewhere doing something about it. But I think with this genocide, we're beginning to see that that is not so much the case. So I remain a bit ambivalent. Also, social media just like rots your brain. It's like so bad for you that I have to do it because I have to promote my books. But if I were not, I would not get on it. That's the other thing. Like, it's just so bad for you, like neurologically. So my stance towards social media, although I use it a lot, is kind of ambivalent.
It's good as a start, you know, like if, I mean, Twitter, I deleted mine some time ago. Twitter for me was like the sole place to find what's happening in the translation world. So same thing as like the place to find out who are the people who are actually doing the reporting or translating. So.
Yeah, but like social media consumption is not activism.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, knowing which sources to follow and to understand the process of what sources are going to be helpful for us to help us think and to think in a way, to have our own thoughts and to engage in things in our own ways are really important. And social media might not be the healthiest thing to be immersed in, but it can be a good starting point.
Yeah, it's part of the constellation of solutions. Over there, yeah, on the aisle. Or, sure.
Hi. I'm a teacher of literature. I'm Persian, like Parisa, and my mom left Iran in 1989, so 10 years after the revolution, and she's horrified of what's happening here now. And she keeps telling me, Samjan, don't say anything bad. You're gonna get in trouble. You're gonna get arrested. You know, and I'm living in San Francisco. I feel very safe where I'm at.
PTSD from being Iranian.
Absolutely. So. My question is, as writers, translators, teachers of literature, how can you best inspire the youth to fight back against this rise of far-right fascist ideologies? I see it even in San Francisco. I see a huge rise in my boys. Well, I would tell you, a majority of my boys align themselves with views of like Charlie Kirk, for example. And how, as intellectuals, as humanists, how do you push back? I know Parisa mentioned both the big and one-on-one work, but I mean, what is to be done? I'm stressing out.
I feel like with the younger generation, since they all hate reading,
it's not necessarily true, but yeah.
I mean, like in a crowd like this, no one's going to hate reading, you know, and it feels like I'm just like preaching to the choir. So I'm like, you know, I'm talking about people who did not grow up in like reader homes or like, or even like with the tradition of activism, they've never really seen it from the adults to learn. I have found that speaking their language, like for example, comic books, film, like documentary films, young adult stories that talk about other youth who have stood up to, you know, to the dark forces of fascism, for example, dictatorship. I find those things and are very helpful, and unfortunately, we do not have shortage of them in Iran. I mean, for example, the two documentaries I worked on, I go to high schools or I go to colleges, and they watch them, and then we talk, and I'm just like, because I grew up in it, to me it's like, oh yeah, oh so-and-so's dad got like executed, or oh yeah, so-and-so like his jaw fell off from like tortures. It's like being Iranian is so normal for us, but when I see the effect of that in like the youth, they are so touched and they're so inspired that oh, you can actually be an activist, or just like the images that are, come out of Iran, that the young people, little like school kids are like taking their hijabs off and like screaming. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, so maybe even if there's a video game that is about like standing up to fascism, so maybe find their own language, and I can give you like plenty of resources and books and names and movies. That works with Iran, so I don't know about.
Okay. Yes. There was yeah.
Thank you so much. I wanted to go back to something you mentioned earlier in the panel about translating taboos, and I'm curious how, kind of on a linguistic level, how that works, since there are different taboos in different cultures and different language. How does it work when you're actually trying to translate and the language for what you think is maybe the same action doesn't quite exist in the same way? Like, how does that work for you when the terminologies are also just totally different and there aren't obvious ways to bring like an understanding of taboo from one language into another? If that makes sense.
That's what makes translation super fun, like finding the solution to things like that.
You have examples?
Yeah, I do have an example. The beginning of Fang Ziqi's First Love Paradise, there is a narration talking about just like as brilliant as the toilet brushed to a brilliant shine, but in the original it has the toilet was brushed to a brilliant shine by a Filipino maid. And that's a big taboo in the racial context. And I have been juggling with a lot of different choices, and eventually I had to take it off. And I did talk to relevant people in terms of my choice, just because there is a certain rhythm that I was trying to bring, especially on the very first page of a novel, that I think this itself would be extremely distracting. I personally do not agree with such a stance, but at the same time, I feel like it would be so extremely distracting, especially in a Western context. So that's one of the, like, I think sometimes taboo aligns with sensitivities, and to know where the sensitivity lies is really important in making choices linguistically, or especially I feel like when it comes to either breaking the taboos or talking about taboos or engaging with topics of the similar kind, is to know how to talk about it, or how to talk around it, or what are the things exactly that we can talk through it.
Sometimes, like in translation, you can like uncover things and excavate things that are not in that form in the source. And I feel like The Vegetarian by Han Kang, as translated by Deborah Smith, did a really great job of that, because there were, in the Korean, there were a lot of things that were kind of like not explained, but in the process of glossing it for translation, it kind of created this really interesting artifact of uncovered taboos, and just sort of like showing even Korean readers, and that's why there was such a backlash in Korea over that translation, where that, oh wow, how dare you explain this, and how dare you mention this? So yeah, translation can be extremely interesting in that way. I think that's all the time we have.
We just have one comment from our live stream audience to end the panel, and it's from Sawad Hussein. She says, I really want to thank the panelists for being so vulnerable and open with their experiences. Thank you all, that's wonderful.
Oh, thank you, Sabai.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Translators lead the discourse. As Anton said, I will use that. Thank you for confronting so many of the forms of censorship and silencing that we're facing today, and for championing solidarity, among translators, among readers, especially at this precarious political moment. One more round of applause for Anton, Parisa, and Jenna. We'll have a short intermission before the next panel. Again, you can meet our panelists outside in the bookstore where they'll be signing books. You can grab a beverage at the cafe, which you can bring back here. Chat with your friends. If you're not planning to stay for the next panel, we kindly ask that you exit your seats so we know how much space we have for the next attendees for our next panel. Our final panel of the day, interspecies translation, will begin at 4 p.m. Until soon. Thank you, everyone.
Good job.
Good job.